We're taking a quick look today at Sigma Optimization Pro software, which works in conjunction with the USB dock to adjust the Sigma Global Vision line of lenses. Once you hook up your lens to the dock like a lens cap and connect the USB dock to the computer via USB cable, the lens will show up in the left-hand column. And the first thing that's going to happen is it's going to alert you if there's lens firmware updates. And it is telling us there is updated firmware available for the 35mm f1.4. So we clicked yes, we want to update this, and we agree that we understand how to update this, meaning don't disconnect the lens, make sure if it's a laptop it's hooked up to a battery source, and then it updates the firmware. Once we are on the latest version of the firmware, we click close, and we can either disconnect the lens or we can go to customization, which is where the real excitement begins. The 35mm f1.4, we can adjust the focus settings. This is a prime lens, so the only focal distance we have is the 35mm focal length. But as you can see, we have 4 microfocus adjustment zones. We can go to plus or minus 20 in these 4 zones for close, near, middle, and distance focusing. And you can figure out exactly if you want to adjust these. You can adjust these each individually based on your own testing and your own experimenting for exactly where you need to tweak it for your DSLR. And once you decide where you want each of these focus points to be, we simply click rewrite. Again, we agree that we understand that we need to make sure the lens stays connected, and it rewrites the firmware. And we have just tweaked our microfocus adjustments on the 35mm f1.4. There you go. And then of course we can go out and rerun our tests to make sure this is exactly where we want our firmware updates to be. And if we want to reset to the default, we can go and click on the default button. But do note that once you click on the default, you still have to click on rewrite in order to reset the firmware. The default is going to zero everything out, but it is not actually going to rewrite the firmware until you click rewrite. And that is plain and simple how microfocus adjustment works. Now let's take a look at how much more interesting this is when you're on a zoom lens. Here we're going to look at the 17-70 f2.8 to f4 DC macro contemporary lens. We check the firmware is up to date, and so we close. Let's go into customization now. Here, when we go to focus settings, this is much more interesting. We have got different focal distances and different focal zones. So for example, at 70 millimeters, at 70 millimeters for close focusing, if we want to fine-tune that, we can fine-tune this. Here you can see we have 16 different zones that we can adjust the microfocus in for different focal lengths and different focal distances. And again, this is going to be something that photographers are going to want to experiment with and adjust based on their own experience and their own tests. This is quick and easy, and here you go. We're fine-tuning many of these fields. Some of these we're leaving at 0. And then once we decide where we want to put all of these, it's just a simple matter of clicking rewrite. Agree again. And the firmware is rewritten. We close this out. And again, if we want to default, we can default all the settings, but remember we have to click rewrite in order to have the default settings reapplied. Hit return, go back, and this is it. And we can take a look at all the lenses we've gotten here to check on the firmware. And that, in a nutshell, is the microfocus adjustment setting. Now let's see what we can do with the 120 to 300 f2.8 sports lens. It tells us there's a firmware update available, so we click yes, and it updates the firmware. We agree to the warnings about making sure this is going to load with no problem, and it loads in the updated firmware. Anytime there's new firmware available, it's going to ask you if you want to update to the newest firmware. It loads in. Tells us the firmware's update is complete. We can disconnect the lens. We click OK, just as a double check. Now, here's where the fun begins. We go into customization, and again, we go into the focus settings. We've got different focal distances and different focal lengths, 120, 150, 200, and 300 millimeters, and all the way from near to infinity. We can adjust these again, minus 20 to plus 20. And again, this is going to be based on your own field observations, experiments, and methodology of determining if you want to, where and if you want to adjust your microfocus based on your own field test. Then we click Rewrite, agree to the warnings, and it rewrites the firmware with our microfocus adjustments. We click Close, and we have just rewritten that. We're going to zero that out again, and then we have to rewrite it again to zero it out. Click Agree, and it rewrites the firmware back with the standard microfocus all zeroed out. Now let's go into customization. This is really cool. We go into the customization mode setting, and we've got two custom modes, Custom 1 and Custom 2. We've got autofocus speed, focus limiter, and optical stabilizer. Let's go first into AF speed settings. And we've got motor drive speed priority, standard, and focus accuracy priority. We're going to set the lens right now to right there. We're at focus accuracy priority, but we're going to go over to motor drive speed, so this is going to speed it up. We click OK, and now we can go adjust the focus limiter. And let's say we know that we're going to be shooting a foot race this afternoon, and we're on the final turn and approach to the finish line, and we've scouted our location, and we know all the action is going to be happening from about 25 to 100 feet away from the camera based on where we are at the finish line on that last turn and where we want our shots. The focus limiter is just going to keep it right in that focus range as the runners come towards us race after race. Click return, and then we go into the optical stabilizer. And we've got dynamic view mode, standard, and moderate view mode. These affect the preview when you're looking through the viewfinder of how much the optical stabilizer effect is going to be visible through the viewfinder. We decide here we want moderate view. Click Rewrite. It rewrites the firmware, and we click Close, and then we click Return. Now let's go and adjust C2 to some different settings. Here we're going to go with a focus accuracy priority autofocus, focus limiter setting. Let's say we're shooting at birds in a nest just outside of our window, and we know that all the action is going to be very, very close to the near focusing point of the lens. So we're focused right on the bird's nest. So we know that it's all going to be happening right in this range that the birds are hopping in and out, and we don't want the focus to be as speedy. And then again, we also want that moderate view because we're going to be looking through the viewfinder for long periods of time. And we click OK. And rewrite, and we've just set two custom modes. And of course, off is going to give you the default lens settings, so there's actually 3 different sets of operational parameters you can have set in the lens at any time. And that is lens customization through the USB dock and Sigma Optimization Pro with the 120-300 f2.8 DG OS HSM sports lens. It really lets you fine-tune the lens for your particular style and subject.